Thank you so much for coming for this press conference. We are grateful that you found some time to be with us. And this is the second press conference for the African civil society actors under the auspices of Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. We had our press conference last week, and we have been observing the negotiations as observers. We have done our work diligently, and now we are here to deliver our statement regarding our observations in the last 1 week. And therefore, we have our press statement entitled, "Enough of Rhetoric, we need to swing to action now." And therefore, we have a team of panelists who are going to be together with us here. Of course, flanked by Dr. Mithika Mwenda, who is the Executive Director, Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, seated third from where I am. And then, of course, we have Grace Sampoma, who is representing Abantu for Development in Ghana. We also have Melissa Jimenez, representing, of course, Yango constituency. We have Mariama Williams, who is representing the Afro-descendant community, and who are also our allies. She's actually the Senior Strategic Advisor for the Global Afro-Descendant on Climate Justice. And then next to her, we have Gertrude Kenyangi, who is actually working with a local organization focusing on farmers in Uganda. And then last, but certainly not the least, we have our sister Juliet Nangamba, who works for Kinamama or African coming all the way from Zimbabwe. So we are going to start off with Dr. Mithika reading the statement, and the rest are going to unpack the statement. Welcome.
Thank you, Charles. I will just do what I've been asked. Just to read the statement entitled, it's actually our reflections on the SB64, the second week. Enough of rhetoric, swing to action now. So as SB64 enters its second week, the African civil society and the auspices of Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance are deeply concerned about the slow pace at which the negotiations progressed in the first week. With only 2.5 days now remaining to the close of the 64th session of SB, and with nothing really substantive coming out of the many hours of formal and informal dialogue processes, the hopes of African communities whose livelihoods are decimated by climate-fueled droughts, floods, heat waves, and diseases are dashed. Unfortunately, Bonn negotiations have been reduced into workshops and consultations, while critical agenda items, especially those that relate to unlocking climate finance, are systematically relegated to the periphery. As the clock ticks, then, beckoning closer of an impactful SB64, because we don't believe that anything will happen in the remaining hours unless miracles happen, the vulnerable communities continue staring at imminent danger of El Niño, which, according to U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the current seasonal forecast guidance suggests that the developing El Niño is likely to be a devastating event, with the sea surface temperature anomalies likely to exceed 2 degrees Celsius in the central and eastern tropical Pacific, which would be noticeable by historical standards, and some forecasts suggesting much higher values that would be of record strength. If historical occurrences are anything to go by, then communities at the front line of climate crisis, that is women, youth, indigenous peoples, smallholder farmers, and what have you, must brace to deal with debilitating flood, which will inevitably wipe out livelihoods, destroy critical infrastructure, and lead to loss of lives. In other regions, severe droughts will be experienced, rendering communities destitute. The unfolding scenarios are particularly notable, and I will outline them. Number one, troubling question of procedural justice. The right to representation at the decision-making fora, particularly for frontline communities, is immutable, and any effort to extinguish such rights must be condemned with the strongest stamp possible. The Secretariat of the UNFCCC is the home to SBs, and it should be as accessible as possible to all negotiators and observers accredited delegates, whether they come from the north or south. It is unfathomable that quite a number of negotiators and observers, particularly from the developing nations, were denied visas to travel and attend SB64. We call upon UNFCCC to ensure that host country protocols do not become an impediment to participation of accredited participants in the future. 2, missing agenda on national adaptation plans and loss and damage. In our statement last week, we flagged out the conspicuous omission of national adaptation plans and loss and damage agenda items in the negotiations in INTRE. We reiterate that adaptation remains a key priority for Africa and that the NAFs are the vehicles through which countries navigate their adaptation priorities. In the previous SBs, the negotiation item on adaptation plans is usually tracked on the means of implementation. Indeed, the annual adaptation needs for Africa is estimated at $70 billion, and that should be delivered by developed countries as public finance to support NAPs. The reality on the ground, however, is that developed countries have vacated their responsibilities, shifted goalposts, and are now pushing for domestic and private sector financing of NAPs, which is not aligned with the provisions of Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement that clearly stipulates the leadership and responsibility of developed countries in the provision of funds. The omission of this agenda item in the SB's program sends alarm bells among African stakeholders, and it could be interpreted as systematic maneuver to postpone or block the inevitable question on financing of the NAFs. Number 3, blurring of the Addis Ababa vision, Belém and Addis Ababa vision on GGA indicators. The Belém and Addis Ababa vision agreed at COP30 was envisioned as a reliable vehicle through which the work on GGA indicators would be fast-tracked to enhance implementation. We reiterate our position as communicated in our statement last week that GGA can only succeed if accompanied by robust means of implementation and indicators that reflect local realities, traditional knowledge systems, and community resilience. Adaptation outcomes must be measured not only through technical metrics but through improvements in food security, water availability, public health, ecosystem integrity, and human well-being. Curiously, the negotiations on GGA indicators works have been reduced into a tug of war between developed and developing countries on the composition of the task force that will deliver on the Belém and Addis Ababa vision, notably on metadata to enable operationalization of the indicators. While African demands for a patent-driven process, developed countries are favoring a technical experts pathway. We assert that the work on the indicators cannot be reduced into purely a technical affair left at the hands of technocrats. It must be a party-driven process, but most importantly, the disagreements on this matter must not be used as diversionary tactic to evade the all-important facet on means of implementation for the GGA operationalization. Similarly, the commitment to triple adaptation finance by 2035 agreed in Belém is likely to hit the guardrails as negotiations of this item at SB64 starts on the wrong footing. While developing countries are pushing for strong language, reaffirming the urgent need to triple adaptation finance coupled with full commitment and urgent delivery of finance for adaptation implementation, the developed countries almost unanimously opposed introduction of adaptation finance goal and tracking under this agenda item. Equally, blocking of the language on means of implementation in the back roadmap on adaptation is ill-informed. It is our considered view that the means of implementation is all agenda items, especially in adaptation, is the most important missing link between the current paradigm and the sustainable future for communities impacted by climate change. What developing countries need is not the numerous diversionary workshops and other proposed in the future, but rather substantive focus on delivery of climate finance at scale commensurate with the existing financing gap. Last but not least, is just transition mechanism must not become yet another debate platform. Last week, we articulated our position regarding this emotive subject, that just transition cannot become another unfunded aspiration. It must be backed by finance, technology, and capacity building support commensurate with the scale of transformation required. We support the African Group of Negotiators' position on the subject and call for a decision that will position the just transition mechanism to become an instrument with authority, clear scope, and above all, fully enabled with means of implementation required to deliver genuine transformation for the last mile communities. It must be capable of enhancing international cooperation, technical assistance, capacity building, and knowledge sharing, and enable equitable, inclusive just transitions while taking consideration of the local context, particularly in the African continent. And finally, we call on parties to break the GINISC, which has characterized the negotiation agenda on climate finance for many years. We plead for a party-driven process and dedicated space to discuss provision, accessibility, quality, predictability, and accountability of climate finance. We caution that Article 2, subsection 1C of the Paris Agreement must not be substitute for developed country finance obligations under Article 9.1. Rather, the two articles must be read together. The decision on this specific item has far-reaching ramifications on means of implementation cited in all the other negotiation items. Parties must understand without iota of doubt that they hold the key to a successful SB64. But this can only happen if they shelve diversionary tactics, procrastination, nationalistic interest maneuvers, promote multilateralism, and embrace the cardinal principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Medeka Mwenda, for that statement. And now I have my panelists who are going to unpack this. And I want to start with Grace Ampoma from Abantu for Development from Ghana. The means of implementation is becoming a thorny issue, particularly in the Baku roadmap on adaptation. What does this mean for women in Africa? In 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Charles. And I will be speaking on issues on adaptation and gender from the Women and Gender constituency. I'm also representing the Africa Climate Justice Movement, which is a feminist organization in Africa. In SB64, as we mentioned last week, the Women and Gender constituency is focusing on the Belém Gender Action Plan, which is the action plan for the Enhanced Lima Work Program, which was adopted in COP30. So this year begins the actual implementation of the Gender Action Plan. So from SB64, we are going to hit the road. And like Dr. Mithika has said, it is impossible to hit the road without the resources that African women need. And if you look at the Belém Gender Action Plan, it states that each of the action plans and each of the areas it's not possible to achieve them without resources. So if you look at issues of means of implementation, if you look at capacity building and all the activities it has listed, it is impossible to achieve each of these without the resources. And as we leave SB64, we have still not had any roadmap to the resources that are available for implementation. Last week, the Women and Gender constituency held a workshop for all the national gender focal points from all the countries. across the globe. And in that meeting, the issue of capacity building for all countries came up, but the Women and Gender constituency is unable to complete its work because of the resources. Now, the work here at SB64 has been woefully slow, as Mithika has mentioned. And once we have this slow and procedural delay, it also means that the African woman who is saddled with flood, who is saddled with having to plant trees or plant her crops 3 times within the year because of flooding, is also awaiting these insecurities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. And this adaptation agenda is connected very much with finance. And we are stuck on 9.1. And the provisional agenda on climate finance work program seems to be eroding, and it might not happen based on what is happening in the negotiation room. So, Juliet, in maybe 2 minutes, what does this also mean, to the African constituency?
Thank you very much. My name is Juliet Nangamba. I work with Akina Mama of Africa and representing feminists across the African region. And I think one thing that we also need to acknowledge is that this SBs is coming at very intersectional geopolitical moments that we see heavily, that we see deepening inequality. We're talking about militarization, we're talking about debt, issues around fertilizers. These issues cannot be separated from the need of gender-responsive climate financing, because the intersection of the climate crisis with other issues is widening and compounding inequality. During the period of SPs, we've really appreciated and welcomed, I don't know whether we've welcomed colleagues, the many workshops that have taken place, and particularly the workshop that had to do with gender-responsive climate financing. The message has been very clear. What is needed is climate finance that is accessible, that is timely, that is grant-based, that is flexible, and finance that reaches the women, indigenous peoples, and communities. We've seen that private finance, climate finance, is not reaching the communities that are intended. 78% of it we heard from presentation during some of the dialogues is not even gender aware. We have the opportunity of the gap to now deal with the structural barriers that are within that are hindering climate finance to get to the communities. What is missing is not the evidence, really. I think we have identified the barriers, and the recommendations have been clear from the onset. We've done enough diagnosis. Time for diagnosis has passed. What we need is implementation. What we need is the actual financing reaching to the communities that are intended.
Thank you so much, Juliet. And I want to turn to Gertrude, representing the farmers' constituency, especially women farmers in that regard. And the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work Program on agriculture is fast coming to an end. Did it deliver for Africa?
Well, my name is Gertrude Kenyanji. I come from Uganda. I'm a small-scale farmer, and I also work with a community-based organization. As far as I'm concerned, it's not just the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work Program that has not delivered. A lot more things. We've had a lot of promises. Agriculture itself has gained traction in the negotiations. And for that, we are grateful. But who is in control of these negotiations? Who's in control of whatever we are counting as gains? For instance, the Belém Declaration on Hunger, Poverty, and Human-Centered Climate Action. It was signed by 43 countries and the EU, calling for action on climate justice for the world's poorest communities. It links closely to the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, the first Global Alliance leaders meeting against hunger and poverty, and the results from the Alliance Fast Track Implementation Planning Action. And also, we have the Resilient Agriculture Investment for Net Zero Land Degradation, led by Brazil, with backing from Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, Saudi Arabia, New Zealand, Norway, Peru, name it. This accelerator would help governments map degraded lands, identify viable restoration projects, and build finance tools that can attract capital, private capital, and so many more. The fertilizer declaration, the food waste breakthrough, all of them are being fronted by countries from the north. There's not an African party that is part of the decision-making in these things. So what we are saying is until you cannot, you are not going to, as you've heard, the lead countries do not include African parties. The least who are the least emitters of greenhouse gases, yet the most vulnerable and susceptible to climate disasters. We want to see the qualitative issues, which are really the software of combating climate change, paid due attention. Such things as human rights, gender equality, climate, gender justice, and the rest addressed. The success of SB64 will hinge on how the people most vulnerable to climate change, not what has come out of the Just Transition Work Program, not what has come out of the Sharm el-Sheikh, whatever.
Thank you, Gertrude, for indicating indeed. We can't see a lot of things happening in all the work streams, but I want now to usher in Maria McWilliams. Because of time, we'll come back to you on that point. Yeah. Maria McWilliams, of course, represents the Afro-descendant fraternity, who are, of course, allies in Africa. What do you have to say particularly on the finance question?
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here representing the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative, which is a project that was put forward in 2015 by the Chisholm Legacy Project and the support of PACJA. We are over 200 million of us all over the world, Africa, in Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, and the US, of course. And we tend to be the most marginalized in those countries and the most impacted by climate. So all of the discussions here, and we've talked about the intersectionality, we've talked about gender, we've talked about farmers, all of these issues are relevant. Definitely, we know from history of this negotiation that finance is always the closure, the last thing to be closed, because it's a trade-off that we are forced to make as developing countries, tend to have to trade off some of our priorities to gain traction in finance, and that's very typical, emphasizing that Article 9.1 is the critical article for developing countries, and also 9.4, and really objecting to developed countries trying to reinterpret and regain history. I think we see the same thing with the adaptation goal, and as well as the linkage between the Just Transition Mechanism and the Just Transition Work Program. And we know that finance is critical to a successful, just, and equitable implementation of any Just Transition program. And for us as Afro-descendants who are located in areas of the world that are very vulnerable, we are very much calling for finance to be a critical part. You cannot close a Just Transition discussion without integrating finance, capacity building, technical access, and so forth. So I just want to, and one more point on the question of representation and access. All of us come from different parts of the world, Latin America, the Caribbean, and so access to visa to come into this process is important. You cannot have an open, transparent process where the government, who have signed an agreement with the UNFCCC, then throws that out and limits the acceleration of visa processes. Badges are also essentially important. Many of us are from small organizations, and if you do a real assessment of the organization representing in the UNFCCC, you will see that there are underrepresentation of Afro-descendant organizations, so that there need to be equitable, just, and transparency around some of these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, and that's a good area to actually finish your submission. Procedural justice is key. And now I want to turn to Melissa Jimenez, representing the Yungo constituency. You've been here following up these negotiations. So what's your take?
Is it working? Yeah, great, sorry. Thank you so much for coming here. I am Melissa Jimenez Gomez-Tagle from the Children and Youth constituency of UNFCCC. I'm representing the youth, but particularly the youth from the Global South. We, as youth, are still demanding for the triple adaptation finance means on loss and damage, especially focused on health, because the health of the planet is the health of the people. And we have seen it in previous years with the COVID pandemic, that once we have a health problem, then it will affect all of us, no matter where we are located, and we saw this. And also coming from the Santiago network of loss and damage negotiating team at Sharm el-Sheikh, I would make a lot of emphasis on financing climate justice. Financing climate justice, financing capacity building, and also raising up a very important issue on the visa. I have a personal experience, not particularly from me, but from a very good friend of mine, very good colleague of mine from Yongo, from India, that was denied a visa. And we don't know why he was denied it, because he provided all the documentation that was required, and still no climate action is coming from there. And some voices are silenced just because of these bureaucratic issues that should not be the reason why climate action is avoided. So I would like to conclude with the statement of, let's finance climate justice and guarantee a transparent and sustainable future.
Thank you so much, Marisa. Thank you so much. And I want to bring in Dr. Milka Mweda as we conclude. Now, considering what is happening here, because SB is supposed to be the forum that sets the agenda for COP, is Antalya COP31 already a lost moment? Should we be thinking about COP32 now?
Thank you very much. I think I will take just a few seconds to really respond to that. We have been in this process for quite a long time. We have seen things unfold, but what we are experiencing here is the lowest moment for the multilateral process. There are, of course, very deliberate effort from the powers that be to collapse this process. What we normally call the axis of evil, in other words, they are not interested for this process to work. Just recently, we saw the voting during the UN for the International Court of Justice opinion. And we saw, if you look at that voting pattern, the countries, that axis which you are talking about, the countries which actually, the fossil fuel addicted countries, were the ones which are resisting. They are the ones, even here, which we want to frustrate this process. I can tell you that the multilateral process is going to succeed, and they are not going to frustrate it. So we are very positive. We are optimistic that there are those working in good faith for the future of this continent, for our continent, of the people, livelihood of the people, survival of humanity, and the health of the planet. So we are optimistic. We are not going to give up. We are going to fight on. And we know we are allies even within governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for listening. You can follow us on our website. The statement will be there. Let's take a photo.